There is,
Access?
it's true. But the bad news that it means is there's a little bit of math involved in this. Here's the thing, I do not want you to get tied down in math. This project is not about math. It's about seeing the pattern shapes and being able to see how to manipulate the pattern shapes. So if you feel like you're getting lost in percentages and math at all, then talk to me. Let's talk about that for a minute. This says that this ruffle is 150%. This one is 200%. This is 250%. What exactly does that percentage refer to? What does it mean?
How much extra you have?
How much extra? Double. I like the way you put it. So if the distance on the base piece of this muslin is 8 inches, what's the length of this piece?
12.
And how did you get to 12? Because you're correct.
50% of 8.
It's 1.5, correct? Which is what
You
makes it
add-
150%. It's 100% plus 50%. So what does that mean this one is? 16. So it's twice 8, et cetera, et cetera. So, step 1, always the same step, make a copy of your pattern. One of the things I cannot stress enough about this step, make absolute certain when you copy your pattern, you copy your grain line. And I'm going to kind of jet through this first one because I think it's relatively easy. The very first step that we have to do whenever we do this project, it's just like what you did with your dart manipulations. The very first decision we have to make is arbitrary. And actually there's a couple of arbitrary decisions there. I don't know why I traced the dart because we don't need it. The first arbitrary decision I have to make is, for the purposes of this project, where I want to add my fullness. You know, if you're looking at these illustrations over here, they're very specific about how it relates to the skirt or how it relates to the sleeve. These are more artistic and more arbitrary. I'm going to say, for the purposes of this, I want to add my fullness, I want to add a band of fullness right there. Okay? And so what I have to do is I have to determine where it's going to begin and where it's going to end. That's your first step.
How come you're marking it?
Say again? Are you processing? I have Mary over here whispering critique in my head. Okay, second decision I need to make is, what percentage do I want to add in here? How much do I want to make it grow? Do I want it to be 200%? Let's say 200% because the math there is easy. So, first of all, I'm just going to take a quick measurement. And again, I'm not being precise. I'm not as concerned about the math. That will come in later. This is, I'm just going to turn it into 4 inches. So that means to be able to get 200% fullness into this 4-inch span, how much fabric do I need to add in?
4 inches.
I need to turn it into twice as much, so I need to add in,
Added 4 inches, which is a total of 8.
I need to add in 4 more inches, which is a total of 8. I'm going to chop away some of this excess paper. Okay, the very first thing I'm going to do is I have to introduce my slash lines. I'm going to go ahead and take a minute, and I'm using my grain line, and I'm drawing a line that is perpendicular to my grain that goes through that point right there. Connie, I want you to come over here so I can make sure you can see all of this, because you've got obstacles in your way. Bring your computer. So, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to draw a perpendicular through my, I'm going to draw a line that's perpendicular to my grain line that runs through my slash mark. Okay? It's important that those are perpendicular to the grain line. I know that I'm adding in 4 inches here, right? We got a choice at this point. We can add in 4 1-inch, we could add in 1 4-inch chunk. We could add in 2 2-inch chunks. We could add in 4 1-inch chunks, etc., etc. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. The more chunks you add in, the better. And that will become more evident in later projects. So it's not going to be as obvious in this particular project. But take that as a rule. So 1 4-inch chunk we could potentially get away with, but it's not great. And 2 2-inch chunks still scares me. So I'm going to say, at the very least, I'm going to add in 4 1-inch chunks. If I am adding in 4 inches, I can go ahead and add in 1 inch there and 1 inch there. So how many more inches do I need to add in? 2, right? So that means I need 2 more slash lines, right? So let's measure this and divide it by 1, 2, 3, and that will give me my other 2 slash lines. So that's essentially 1 1/3 and 1 1/3. And again, they're actually not 1 1/3 because inches don't break down that way on these rulers, but I don't really care. It's close enough. Draw in my slash line.
I don't understand why we're going that direction.
It was an arbitrary choice because I said I wanted to add it in right here.
Oh.
It was totally aesthetic. There was
Okay.
no other reason. It could have gone here, it could have gone here, it could have gone there.
You can put it wherever you want.
You can put it wherever you want. I chose right there.
Okay.
So the next thing I'm going to do to make my life a little bit easier is I'm going to number my pieces, because in a minute it's going to start to look very, very abstract. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because ultimately I'm cutting this apart into 5 pieces.
Here
I
we go.
start with the slash line between 1 and 2, and I chop. I'm going to take a piece of my scrap, tape it in behind, just like you've done for everything else. We know that we're adding an inch into this slash, right? So I measure over an inch, drawing a line, and then I'm ready to tape number 2 to it. But how do I know where this goes? It could go anywhere along that line, couldn't it? Where does it
guess.
need to go?
Your grain needs to line up.
This is why that grain line is so important, because this line needs to be continuous. What we have to make sure of is, we're essentially doing copies of copies of copies in a way. And if we don't maintain the relationship between the pieces, then the shape itself is going to get torqued. Especially because we're working with a dart sloper, how important the shape is. And so if we start to take this bottom portion and offset it from the other part, then it's not going to fit properly later, is it? So what I've got to do is I've got to pay attention to my grain line. So I'm going to draw in a continuation of my grain line right there. Then I'm going to match new grain line to old grain line, pin, and then pivot until old slash line matches new 1-inch line, and tape. By the time I slash this 3 more times and then tape the whole thing back together on the back side, how much tape am I going to use?
Tons and tons.
Tape fiesta. Don't be afraid of it. So guess what I'm going to do here?
You're gonna cut it off.
The exact same thing. So what was step 1 in our process?
Just cutting.
Chop it. Chop along the line that's between number 2 and number 3. What's my next step?
Tape on.
Find some paper.
Yep, get scrap. Tape it on behind. What's step 3?
Measure out an inch.
Measure over that inch that I'm slashing in. What's the next step? Say it again. Straight grain. What's the next step?
Cut it on the, or line it up. You don't cut it, you line it up.
Line it up. So you should be able to see that once let me get it lined up and taped, you should be able to see that it will be a repeat of the exact same process along for each one of these slash marks, right? Until the whole thing accordions up in that direction. Once the whole thing is slashed and spread, because I'm not going to do these two because I'm presuming you guys can see what's going to happen. Once I do all of that, what's my next step? Because my pattern is not finished yet.
Do you do like these lines?
Then I have to go back and true up my pattern edges. Take a look at my center back line right here. That one's a really, really easy line to true up, isn't it?
It's just 90
Why?
degrees.
Exactly, because it's one long straight line. So all I've got to do is connect the dots, and then it's completely true again. And it completely resembles what was there before, doesn't it? But what about the side seam?
That's all crazy.
That one gets a little weirder, doesn't it? Because it starts to stair step. So what do? What did we do to true up this seam to begin with? When this pattern was initially generated?
Split the difference?
No,
Where's,
but I want you to come back to that. What did we do?
not just from that point to that point.
We turned it into a straight line connecting point A to point B, like so. Now, Rasmeen said split the difference. Interesting. What does it start to do?
Did it add a little bit of,
What you can see is it starts to take some away here, but it just added some right there. So it actually splits the difference itself.
interesting.
Once that's done, we're then ready to notch the pattern, label it, and ready to cut it out. Notice I said notch the pattern. Before, the only notches in this pattern had to do with that dart. There's a set of, and that dart is gone now, because we're trying to make it fuller, right? We're not trying to make it fit the body. But there is a set of notches that needs to be introduced so that this could be stitched to its friend on the front. What set of notches need to be introduced?
Oh, maybe the two sides of the E's.
Exactly. We need a notch there at the bottom of our gathering, and we need a notch there at the top of our gathering. And we need those notches in the exact same place on the other side. Let's pretend that this is the front for a moment. So I would just do this. I would lay my front against my back, and I can add a notch there. Lay it against my back down here, and add a notch right there. So what that tells me is that all of that gathering is contained evenly between these two notch points
When you sew them together.
when you go to sew them together. Exactly. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And we're just gathering the front piece, not the back.
Let's
Gathering.
not get there yet. So that's how you do equal fullness. It's pretty easy, isn't it? Let's go backward. And let's do one-sided fullness this time. Let's use the same placement. I still want it to be right here. But this time, I want 0 at my center back, and I want 4 additional inches. I want 200% along my side seam. How does that change what we're going to do?
Would you, when you're cutting, would you just go up here and stop?
You are absolutely correct. So let's redefine that and see. The good news is we can take this apart and do exactly what Connie was talking about. So instead of slashing all the way, we would stop. So this center back edge would remain contiguous.
Is that a word?
It is actually. And this one would pivot so that this edge is on the 1 inch line, like so. And we start to get something that looks like that. Right? Let's do it along the second one that we did. The thing that's interesting about this, before, in our equal fullness, the thing that told us how the pieces related to each other was the grain line, right? This time we don't have to worry about that because since this edge remains contiguous, it maintains the relationship between the pieces. In the long run, what's going to happen to this? What's the overall pattern shape going to be when all is said and done? Center back is going to look something like this. There's side seam is going to take on a curve like this. And then you're going to have your armhole and your shoulder and your neckline. So it's going to look something like that. We know after we do all the slashing and spreading that the next step is to
Make a copy.
No.
True.
Is to true your edges. How are we going to true this edge right here?
We don't have to.
We do have to because it's going to become a little, it's going to develop a series of corners. So Rasmin's exactly right. We're just going to lay our curve in and turn it into a smooth curve so it's not quite staccato. What are we going to do along this edge? The exact same thing. This, for me, starts to get a little more complicated in the truing up process. I want to do this real quick just so that we can see it a little more. So let's do that. And let's do that. You can see the kind of curve the whole thing's going to take on. It's going to look something like that, right? And so then you introduce your curve along here. We don't have a very drastic curve at the moment, especially if you elect to do this, say, right here across a bust point, or on some of the really curvy moments of your side back princess seam, you're going to get a really hefty curve. It's going to be far more convex than this one is. And when that happens, then you do want to pay attention to splitting the difference. So what do I mean by that? I know that it begins right there. So my curve wants to originate there, and I know it ends right there, so it wants to terminate there. I'm then going to try and have a curve that runs through the center point there, the center point there, and the center point there. That starts to create my splitting the difference. And it will start to do the same thing that we saw happen before, where some gets added in some spots, or taken away in some spots, and added in other spots. So here's my next question for you. Ultimately, your goal is to cut this thing out of fabric. Where's your grain line go? You got an indication that your grain's supposed to be there, 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 and there.
Oh my.
Which one do you follow?
Top portion.
Alyssa says top portion. Why?
That's the only one that part that has an actual straight grain now, since it curves just like the bottom.
I think what Alyssa's seeing is this is the majority of the pattern remains unchanged, right? So she's thinking this is a straight grain. What do you think?
Just drawing a new straight grain.
The truth is, you can choose whatever you want. You can
Okay.
choose this one, or this one, or this one, or this one. I do, however, like Alyssa's thinking here. For the purposes of this project, choose the chunk of the piece, the largest chunk of the piece that remains unchanged, and keep that grain line. The thing that's nice is, if we keep that grain line, bless you, what does it do to all of this down here? What does this edge start to be? What does that edge start to be in relationship to our grain?
Bias.
It starts to be on the bias, doesn't it? And that's actually going to help us a lot in the long run.
But when the one side is gathered, doesn't the other side become more straight?
It will in terms of its fit, but because we have to start in that two-dimensional format, it still is going to have that bias grain that's then pulled up into here.
Okay.
So, now comes the hardest one. Unequal. How do you suppose we do unequal? Like you've experienced before, because we talked about how unequal is kind of a hybrid of the other two. This is going to become a hybrid of both approaches as well. So, first, we've decided that it's going the exact same spot. The next thing we have to decide is percentages. In this last iteration, we decided that it was 0% here, and 200 or 100% here, and 200% here. Now we have to decide: is this 200%? Is this 400%? Is this 10% and this is 50%? Like, what are we going to do? I'm going to say, for the purposes of our demonstration, let's make this 200% and let's make this 300%. So we have 4 inches. So we know along this edge, it means that we have to add in 4 inches. If this is 300%, and so our goal is to get it up to 12 inches, that means we need to add in 8 inches, doesn't it? So that means on this side, we're adding in 1 1/3 on each of our slashes, 1 1/3. Over here, we're adding in 2 2/3 on each, right? Okay, so let's go back to our original. Our grain line, while it wasn't important, well, it was important in the first manipulation we did, and it was not important in the second one, it's crucial in this third one. So you can see that I've slashed 1 away from 2, and I would draw my grain line in immediately, so that it extends well beyond piece number 1. Why? Because what I have to do now, I know I'm adding in 1 1/3 here and 2 2/3 here. So let's go up here and add in our 1 1/3. Oh wait, that's not true, is it? It's just 1 inch here. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just 1 inch. Yeah, it's 1 inch and 2 inches. So I'm going up here and I'm marking my inch, and down here I'm marking my 2. Once again, I'm faced with a conundrum. Where the hell does the whole thing go? It could just as easily go here, as long as it runs through the 1 inch and the 2 inch marks, as it could go over here, as long as it runs through the both. So this is where the grain line comes into play. I match my grain line first, and in fact, I'm going to get rid of this tape so that we can do this a little more easily.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Well, give me 1
Well, it's
second, and
kind
then
of
we'll
like you're
demo.
just doing the first one, but then
It's kind of cracked out. So, let's match grain line to grain line. And then pivot,
Oh.
so that this edge lies on my 1 inch mark and that one lies on my 2 inches. You can see where I placed it, it didn't really work. So I've got to adjust it a little bit.
Okay. So you start with matching the grain lines as best you can.
Yep.
Okay. So you just drew points at each end, not a full slash line?
That is correct.
Okay.
I mean, could you do it so that you would like fully? Oh, never mind. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
So again, same thing up here. An inch goes right there. 2 inches goes off the paper, of course. Okay, off the paper. And as Rasmi noted,
Okay, wait, so we draw a perpendicular slash line, and we cut along that, and we add the tape, we add the excess pattern piece at the back, and that's what we mark the two unequal points on?
correct.
Okay.
Yep. So there's my 1 inch, there's my 2 inches, and as Rasmi noted, I'm just sort of making a giant mark. It's not like it's a specific point in space. Now I'm going back to my grain line. I'm matching grain line to grain line, but then this edge to 1 inch and this edge to 2 inches. It's a little difficult because the tape took away my edges. And I start to get that. So you can see in the long run what's going to happen is it's also going to take on a curve. It's just going to be the curve's going to have a slightly different personality than the previous curve did. Once we get through that process, we have to go ahead and do our truing up with a curve like we've done before. We have to introduce notches. This time, we're probably going to need notches on this side as well, because for the purposes of these projects, all of our closures are on center back, right? So that means that this has to get gathered into a zipper or, something back there. And then, last but not least, we would have to establish our grain line. Again, I recommend, for the purposes of these projects, I want you to find the chunk of the pattern that you've got, the largest chunk of the pattern that's untouched, and maintain that grain line. So let's go back to the specifics of the project that you're going to do. You're going to generate your pattern for your princess seam sloper, and then you're going to do an example of one-sided fullness, of equal fullness, and unequal fullness. And again, these can go wherever you want. I chose to put it there. Could it have gone here, from waist to neckline? Sure. Could it have gone from armhole to center back? Could it go armhole to waist? You can go wherever you want. I don't really care.
Do you want it all at 200% though, or do you care the percentage?
That's the other thing is I encourage you to play around with your percentages. Here's the thing that's most important though. Underneath, there's a reason that our chart here stops at 150%. Why?
Too much, if not.
It's not too much.
Too little.
It's too little. Less than 150% starts to be ease, and it's not gather. So, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to do anything less than 150%. You are welcome to do more, and you're welcome to do whatever you want up above that. I would not recommend going any higher than 400%.
Just wanna.
But you could go from here.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I recommend going any more than 400%?
That's just a lot of material.
It's a lot of fabric. It's a pain in the ass to pattern the whole thing. You're welcome to just put it wherever you like, and then we will move it later. Do you need us to sign it all?
Yeah, if somebody wants to sign that would be great.
That would be great. If you wouldn't mind talking to Brenda, that would be awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And so you can choose whatever you want. This is a great opportunity. You know, part of the reason we have this hanging on the wall is so that you can start to develop a visual relationship between 200% and 200%, 250% and 250% to see how tight they are. And so you're welcome to do 300%, 325. But if you start to get too big, yeah, your pattern pieces get ridiculously large. It's a lot of fabric to work with. And the pattern pieces take on really weird shapes. August,
Oh, yeah.
August, sweetie, you have to stay. You're not going in the elevator right now. August, come.
August, come here. No, don't go in the elevator.
Good boy. So, does that
I
make
don't wanna
sense?
go in the elevator.
So the last thing I
It's
need
like
to
that
do
Super
is
Bowl commercial.
I just need to check and see, I need to check the syllabus to see exactly what's due on Friday. This is a lot of work. Questions?